Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast show. I'm your host, Phillip Boutté Jr. A special thank you to our sponsor, Universal Costume Department, for their continued support on the show.
Here we are at Universal's Costume Department main warehouse, where everything is possible. This fabulous jewelry room where you can find pearls, you can find jewelry when we want to accessorize. This is the tie wall. Look at what this selection is. Any color you want, any style you want, anything that you need to dress your actors going to a party, a wedding, where you could find armor, post-apocalyptic. Universal has a great selection to get pieces to help create great new costumes. Brought to you by Universal Studios.
Designing Hollywood is dedicated to all things movies and celebrates the talented industry professionals from producers, cinematographers, costume designers, and more. The show covers all high-profile industry professionals who contribute to the magic of Hollywood, diving deep into the heart of the movie industry, exploring the artistry, craftsmanship, and stories behind the scenes that bring your favorite films to life. Our guest today has been designing costumes for Broadway regional theater, film, television, dance, and opera productions for close to 30 years. He began his Broadway career with the groundbreaking musical Bringin' the Noise, Bringin' the Funk, directed by George C. Wolfe. Most recently, he's known for his work on both of Lin-Manuel Miranda's Tony Award-winning Broadway productions, Hamilton and In the Heights. He also designed MJ the Musical and Death Becomes Her, which is currently running on Broadway. In the United States and across the globe, he has designed for such renowned companies as the Metropolitan Opera, Bolshoi Ballet, and the English National Opera, to name a few. His feature film credits include Harriet for Focus Features, Hamilton for Disney+, West Side Story, directed by Steven Spielberg, and Wicked, directed by John Chu. In 2016, he received an Emmy Award for NBC's The Wiz Live, as well as a Tony Award for Hamilton. Other notable honors include 2 Lucille Lortel Awards, 4 Helen Hayes Awards, a Princess Grace Foundation Fellowship, and the Princess Grace Statue Award. He holds an MFA from New York University and a BFA from North Carolina School of the Arts. He has been a privilege to instruct students as a guest artist at both New York University and North Carolina School of the Arts. And from 2003 to 2006, he held a faculty position at Carnegie Mellon University. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome my friend and award-winning costume designer, the very talented Paul Tazewell, to the Designing Hollywood show. Welcome, Paul.
Oh, thank you, Phil. It's so great to be here.
I'm glad to have you. We always start just in general with kind of like the boring stuff. So I want to start with you with just saying, how did you get in the industry? Like what drew you to becoming a costume designer?
Early on, those early days, when I was in high school, I fell in love with performance. I fell in love with theater, and I wanted to be a dancer. I wanted to be an actor. I wanted to star on Broadway, and so that was my dream. I made every attempt and decision to move towards that. And one of those was once I graduated, because I was designing costumes for the same shows that I was in high school. But I went to Pratt Institute to study fashion, mainly because I wanted to be in New York City so that I could start auditioning and develop my career as a performer. As it turned out, it wasn't a good fit, and I decided to transfer to, it was fashion that wasn't a good fit. Mm-hmm. And that was my major. And I decided to go to North Carolina School of the Arts in Winston-Salem, thinking that I could double major in dance and design.
Too hard.
So I had to choose, but thankfully I had to choose. And with some help from my parents, I chose to focus on costume design. And then I finished out the next 3 years and graduated at University of North Carolina School of the Arts. And then I entered into the graduate program at New York University in New York. And I finished that out in 3 years and thankfully started working off and on. I mean, I was freelancing And I guess a couple of years in, because my first year out, I was invited to design a production called Stand Up Tragedy at the Arena Stage in
Amazing.
Washington, D.C. And then I was invited back to design a production of Caucasian Chalk Circle at the Arena Stage. And then somewhere in that same year, I was asked to take over the resident costume designer position because the person that was in that position retired. So that was a fortunate event as well, because I was with a company with a team of amazing and very talented costume makers, and I was able to hone my skills without the gaze of New York City. And yeah, then things just, the doors started opening up. Not easily. I mean, I say it as a throwaway, but there, as I'm sure any of your listeners, being a freelance artist, is no joke, and how you maintain that, maintain a lifestyle, and it requires flexibility and tenacity and a lot of hope.
I got a chance before she passed away to meet costume designer Aiko Ishioka.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And one of the things she said that just made me laugh is she said costume design is despair. She felt very very Japanese. So she's like,
Yes.
it's despair. And then she's like, and a little bit of hope and then despair. Like it was the best thing ever, but I'll never forget that, because she was kind of talking about the freelance art style, or like kind of like the lifestyle of a freelancer. But I did want to say, because it's hard to explain to people, I feel like my passions are very similar, which is I was dancing and I wanted to do music, and I just liked the arts in general. And I want you to talk about really quickly, like, how did you kind of focus and hone in? Because there is a difference between like kind of like overall fashion design and then costume design, and then having all these loves, right? Because I was a double major. Like I majored in film and illustration, and then I was like dancing on the side, and I was like, I can't keep up all of these things. Yeah. So like, how did you kind of like, or did it funnel organically, or how did you like switch your mindset for saying, I don't know if I want to do fashion, I want to do costume design, and I'm not going to do dance? Like, how did you kind of funnel that passion into like a direction?
It's how did I do that? I mean, I know, I can say that all of those other things has made me a better costume designer. My love of dance, knowing how to move my body and being in touch with my body and being in touch with seeing shape, human form, has informed how I design. The same for acting and understanding character development, and and being in that role of creating a character, and that has informed what I do and how I manage telling stories through clothing. It has made me a much more informed costume designer. There were some things that that were in play as I was making that decision. One, I just needed to finish out my schooling, and that when I shifted over, because when I shifted over, there was maybe a year of grief around it. Like it was like, well, I have to set this aside and get myself through college. But set this aside, meaning my desire to be a performer. But I think what was informing that decision was also thinking about the future. And at that time, I was not seeing many characters written for people that looked like me that were the kind of character that I felt like I could play. Like, I wanted to be a leading man. I wanted to be, a leading man in a Broadway show. So it was, that's a different.
Correct.
And, it was, so, what I was seeing in film and and even on stage, they it was pretty limited, for a Black man. And so I
Mm-hmm.
felt like uh, I would have more longevity in the career of being a costume designer. And if I could be okay with being a costume designer and have that be my creative outlet, then I would just be more successful. That was paired with the fact that I was excelling in that program,
Mm-hmm.
and encouraged in that program. So it seemed to be the thing that was coming to me. You could think about it spiritually. It was just coming to me in a much easier fashion, where I was really struggling to put the pieces together to be
Mm-hmm.
a performer. And so I made that. I just calmed myself with the help of my parents and said, okay, well, this is what I'm pragmatically, this is what I'm going to do. And then by the time that I was graduating, then I was in a different, it was kind of a mind loop. I was my colleagues, my friends were applying to graduate schools because that's what you did at that time. And I graduated from undergrad in '86.
Mm-hmm.
So it was, there were a number of graduate programs that were just starting, but there were very established programs. One at NYU, which is where I went. The other one was at Yale. And when I researched, I was investigating the best school to go to. Young designers were coming out of Yale. Young designers that you were seeing, out in the business were coming out of Yale. And so that was where I really wanted to go. I applied to both. I didn't get accepted into Yale, but I did get accepted into NYU. But that
Mm-hmm.
then put me in the heart of theater making, which was where I needed to be. And also, when I think about, the fact that I ended up at Arena Stage in Washington, D.C., Zelda Fitzhandler, who was the founder of that theater,
Mm-hmm.
was also running the program at the acting program at NYU, the
That's
graduate acting
amazing.
program. And her artistic associate, his name is Tazewell Thompson, and we're
Mm-hmm.
not related, but he's a director, and he was the kind of the first director, well, the director that that I worked with for my graduate production, my final graduate production. And then he was the one that invited me down to the Arena Stage and to do that next production. So it was all of those connections. There was definitely some other being that was in control of
Mm-hmm.
where I needed to be, and I let myself flow along with that, because that just happened to be what was operating.
It's hard to explain to people too that like a lot of the things, because you just said that perfectly. It's not like you're actively like thinking about some of these things; they just kind of organically happen. And it's hard to kind of think about like you can always look at it and you're like, oh, that's what was happening after, right? So the passions that you had were kind of leading you in a direction, but then also one of the things that happens underneath it, especially for artists of color, which I want to kind of touch on really quickly because you talked about it, was there's this passion and this drive to see yourself in roles, and then it kind of can transition into being like a player that actually helps to produce that as opposed to being in front of it yourself. One of the things that I know for me, very similarly, I grew up acting, so I remember it was the same thing. I started to notice that there weren't necessarily roles that I wanted to play offered to me in great enough quantity. And so I feel like it kind of organically pushed me behind the scenes to be that change, specifically because I loved like adventure. So it's like you always have to imagine yourself like in Goonies or Neverending Story or Flight of the Navigator, any of those things, right? And so it's interesting that you kind of had a similar story. And I think that there are a lot of artists that I've either talked to or interviewed that kind of share that topic where they kind of, it's like, I think one thing that I feel has been really important or that I've learned through that is like kind of like almost like organic empathy, which is if you grow up kind of not seeing yourself, you immediately can empathize with characters or things that don't look like you, but you can still feel it anyway, right? Because you're used to placing yourself in that position. And I think that the opposite can happen if you're used to everything kind of like catering to you, or if you're used to seeing so many things, you never really have to step outside of yourself to go into the perspective of others.
Yeah,
Have you
that's great.
noticed have you noticed that kind of organically, like through your art and your work?
Definitely. I mean,
Yeah.
just as you were talking, I was thinking about, when I was growing up. I mean, what I was delighted by was like uh, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and
Hmm.
that kind of film, and uh, what what uh, what was that? Witch Mountain, was that the name of it?
Escape
There
from
was
Witch
a movie,
Mountain.
yeah, Escape from Witch Mountain,
Hmm.
and the Brady Bunch, and just all of these, both fantasy and not fantasy, but idyllic stories
Hmm.
that were very charming, and they set a tone for what I wanted to experience,
Hmm.
and that kind of feeling. But then I never saw somebody that looked like me experiencing that, and
Yes.
it was, it therefore, and that's been one of, my driving, uh, uh, my priorities, in taking up space, is to be a face that is doing this and sharing it with others so that they can, so other people that look like me and everyone else can see that I'm doing it and that it is an option as far as creating and changing our world, and making, making your mark, and if you don't know that it's an option, if you don't know that costume design is an option, if you don't know that conceptual art is an option, then you
Yeah.
don't think about it. You
Yeah.
don't, but you might be very proficient at making costumes and sewing and drawing and creating characters, and that, but you have to make it, and doubly so for people of color, communities of color, because
Hmm.
it's just, how those, it's interesting. It's kind of like, what is that, it's like your feed, like you
Yeah.
get certain images, but you don't get all of them, and
Correct.
that's how, the media works. But to open it up so that so that other people might have an opportunity to see that, yes, indeed, I'm doing it, and that means that you can do it. And and if you want to be a part of this, or a production designer, or there's this whole world that's going on behind the scenes that unless you are exposed to it, you never know.
And I will say this is a good transition for this, which is okay. So now you've gone, I want to talk about like just your personal kind of thought process. Now you stepped into this wonderful project of Wicked, right? So now you've done that, and now you've got Cynthia Erivo playing Elphaba, who you also worked with on Harriet. So the juxtaposition between those two things, something historical and then something that's fantasy, and kind of seeing her play both of those roles, I feel like that ties in together with what we're talking about, at least in terms of like now, like kind of now you're doing it, right?
Right.
So like, were there moments when you were working on these things where you felt like, hey, I'm actually accomplishing this goal, like, being able to put stuff out for people to see, and to see like a Black woman specifically, like kind of being in charge and commanding these like leading roles?
Absolutely. I mean, I was beside myself. I was so happy when John decided to cast Cynthia. I mean, yeah,
Hmm.
and indeed, we had worked together previous on Harriet,
Hmm.
and she was a delight to work with there. She was,
Hmm.
an amazing athletic trooper. I mean, she was just,
Hmm.
she was a professional. She works with intent. She's
Hmm.
very collaborative. It was a joy. That experience was a great joy, and there were a number of things that were going on as well. Because I was grieving my husband's passing, and I was in the middle of this film, and needing to be present for her, and she, her heart was open to that as well,
Hmm.
acknowledging that, and it's just, that it was very full. We were in the middle of muddy fields of Virginia, making this
Hmm.
film about this amazing woman being played by this amazing woman.
Hmm.
And, it was quite wonderful. So then to be able to carry that relationship into this next journey was a huge gift. Because, partly because, and I'm always, as a designer anymore, I'm thinking about what is my what's my story investment in telling this story? I'm always asking because I need to understand who these characters are as I'm making decisions about what they're going to wear.
Correct.
So I need to have that intimate connection to these characters. And for me, growing up as a black boy and man, I, you know, being marginalized because of the color of your skin is the point. For me, it is
Yeah.
the point of this story. It
Correct.
opens up and has a ramification of that. But being vilified for something that you cannot control is my life experience. It has been my life, part of my life experience. So it gave me a connection to it. So then to have it realized by casting a person of color in that role to make more meaning, create more meaning around this story that has up to this point been a fairy tale for for America, but it just resonates in a much deeper way. And I think that that is what the beauty of the Wicked film is, and also of the that collaboration that is Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande. I mean, and all because John Chu was thoughtful about how he was casting the film.
Let's talk about that for a little bit, because I want to give John his flowers. Like, what was the process like working with John Chu? Because this film is such an amazing translation from Broadway to film. It's one of the best ones, and I think that deserves kind of its due. But like, how was that collaborative process in working with him, and like, your first kind of initial thought processes with like what he was going in the direction and stuff? Talk about that.
John is an amazing man. I mean, he's very warm. He's very clear about his intention when, as he's telling a story. But in that clarity, he also keeps enough space for the other creatives to be able to manifest, a vision. And so, he, because of his personality, he creates a very safe space to be vulnerable, and therefore offering up ideas that you're not so sure about, or that are, that might be a little fringe, or might be incomplete. And how can you make, how can we collectively make this into something, that is meaningful? And so, my first meetings were looking at images, and I was, that was the time where I was really inspired by mushrooms. I was inspired by fungus. I was, so there are these abstracts of texture and qualities, the qualities of, light as air, and floating and effervescence, and, and trying to make sense of these qualities, nature overall, and how it relates to this story. So being able to speak abstractly with a director, especially when you're trying to create a space that could be anything but is undefined, or only defined by text and also by assumption. But we were trying to get away from what the original Wicked Broadway show was, and we were, and also acknowledging but not recreating the Wizard of Oz. So
Yes.
it was always, and he, all the way through, maintained a very open, playful, creative space to do all of this. I mean, he really, that's just how his brain works, and and anything is anything is possible quality, which it just that is that's ambrosia for me, because I can go in so many different ways, and he can also be very he can be very clear, and as far as a director for actors,
Mm-hmm.
I witness him, have conversations, directorial conversations with his actors that are very dear. Like
Mm-hmm.
they speak to the human experience. So I think that he carries all of that in him, and that then is part of the creative process, and that was it was he was the perfect director for this,
Mm-hmm.
um, for Wicked, and it was a perfect, for me, it was a perfect collaboration, that experience, where it met all those things. I've had I've had many collaborative experiences. I've
Mm-hmm.
had very few that really hit that spot,
Mm-hmm.
where it fills all of the creative experience of making, whether it's making film or making, theater. It's, and this experience was indeed, that.
It's one of the things that I notice you can, especially if you're kind of breaking down a film and watching it, and then you've been behind the scenes in different departments. Like I've been in art department, I've been, what's it called, costume, all of the different things and how they work together, makeup, hair, all of that. One of the things you can tell from the top down is it feels like John's spirit is very similar to yours, and I think that that's why I wanted to bring that up, which is you guys kind of creatively amplify your teams because you don't overstep or crush them to the point where they feel like they can't explore their creativity. So I want to give you props for that because I think that that is rare. And I want to keep calling it out as much as I can because it is difficult to be a creative, to work on something, to try to like kind of collaborate with people, and then also kind of feel like you're under like pressure, under pressure in a negative way, right? So the
Mhm.
positivity is very much so there. And what I want to express to the audience and everyone is that that does translate very much so to the finished product. Like you can feel it. You can feel the camaraderie, you can feel the collaboration, and you can feel that all those departments were working really well together, right? You can feel from top down. So if the leader's doing it and everyone's kind of following suit, it's just this special magic. And sometimes it just doesn't happen like that all the time,
Right.
right?
That's true.
Um,
Yeah. I mean, I think, if I were to, put my finger on what I think is in operation, it is tempering your ego
mhm.
so that you can allow for other people to take up space. I mean,
Yes.
I'm very aware, and it was because, starting in my career, uh, this was actually, because I was assisting when I was still in graduate school. So
Mhm.
I made a lot of costumes for other designers,
Yes.
and so I know what that process is. I know what the process of tailoring is. I know what the process of fabric painting is. I know what,
Mhm.
I know what it is to do drawings and to, and, all of it. I have that in my bank of experience. And also, I made a decision very early on that I wasn't going to be a crazy costume designer. I was actually going to, I was going to be someone that actually embraces what, other people bring to this event. That it
It's
wasn't going to
incredible.
be all about me. That it was,
Mhm.
that it can be shared, and it's necessary that it is shared. That space is shared. You get the best work from that, and acknowledging that work. And it started by just, working closely with drapers and tailors in small costume shops all around the country, and acknowledging my appreciation for what their ability is, because I know, I would never be able to be a dressmaker, day in, day out. I don't have that patience. I used to, what comes
Mhm.
up,
Uh-huh.
I always had these like crochet projects, and I would say, okay, if I'm going to sit down, I'm going to make an Afghan. But what
Uh-huh.
would come out was like a 2-inch wide Afghan. That's all I would. It would be
That's
as long
it.
as
Like,
the head, but only 2 inches wide.
said I'm done. I
I
can't do
had no patience. But I know, I know the process well. I mean, I actually, if when I was making it, it would just take me forever because
Mhm.
I wanted for it to be absolutely perfect. But I honor those people that are able to do it really well.
Yeah.
And I have learned over the years how to orchestrate, how to edit, how to fit, and what is that language that I need to use for all of those, whether it's talking to an actor or talking to a director as collaboratively, talking to an actor about their character and about clothing and fit, or talking to a draper or tailor and how I imagine that a costume will come together. And then being able to share what that is, because they're more connected to the fabric than I am. So it's always a creative journey.
Let me bring this up. It's a stat because we're talking about it right now, which is a crew type, right? So you had, I'm going to read this, but you had supervisor, assistant costume designers, buyers, dryers, or dyers, sorry, Adria dyers, textile artists, fabric printers, hand embroideries, embroiderers, machine embroiderers, hand knitters, machine knitters, weavers, milliners, hat makers, jewelry makers, model makers, leather workers, armor makers, metal workers, 3D printing experts, illustrators, buyers, tailors, cutters, costume makers, principal standby crew, crowd crew, crowd costume fitters, costume alterations teams, and laundry teams, which is over 70 people with wide ranges of skill sets working in 8 workshops at any given time. And I want to bring that up to say, how do you manage that? Like in your brain, like how do you become the person that's kind of over all of that stuff all happening at once?
Well, first off, I want to say, that this speaks to like all of those different roles, all of those different professions are a profession that, that somebody can have and make a living doing it. So anyone who's young out there, there are many ways of taking part in creating costumes. You were asking, how do you manage it? I think there is a certain amount of trust. There's a lot of trust, not a certain amount. I mean, and that is also what I'm asking of the director, of John, that and the producers, that you're trusting me to be in this role and to do my best job. And those people that were pulled together. Now, these were artisans that I had never worked with, except for Mio Guberinish, who is our 3D, like a manifester. I mean, he did the 3D modeling and then created the images and did a lot of laser cutting and also applied it to many different elements within the film, the design. And I brought him over from the US, but everyone else, I didn't know them, and I relied on my wardrobe supervisor, Dulcie Scott, to pull together a team of artisans, knowing that we were going to be faced with creating a world that never existed. So we needed to have a full team, those 70 artists, who could come together to create this original Land of Oz. And the joy of that, and it was necessary, is that we were all under the same roof. And so I could be in my office next to Dulcie and walk down the hallway, walk into the next door, and be with the people that were creating the costumes, go downstairs and go to the fitting room, meet with our artists, our performing artists, and then also work with the machine embroiderers and the beaters and the weavers, all right there. And I right outside of my door, my office door, was my team of assistants. And that was, I had 2 main assistants for my principal and secondary, and then there was an assistant who was managing all of the background. And obviously, because I couldn't be in all places at the same time, I relied on them to raise a flag or to bring me what I needed to focus on at any given time. But it also was imperative for me to engage with each of and I wouldn't have it any other way, is I needed to, personally engage with each of the tailor drapers to be communicating what I was imagining would happen. And thankfully, they were all connected and wanting to create this world that I had come up with, as you know, with you and your team and other concept artists. And that is something that is it's learned. It's learned how you work best with assistants or with associates. And it took me a bit of time and maturity to not let because I'm one that wants to do it all. And I feel because I tend to be a perfectionist, so I think that I'm the only one that can make this be as I imagine it is in my head. But you can't really realistically do that.
Correct.
And that's going from being, having designed The Wiz in high school and doing it all, with the help of my family, indeed, but, doing it all and then realizing, oh, well, this is my plight, but indeed it doesn't have to be. So
Correct.
You have to shift into, how do I delegate? How do I communicate? How do I, verbalize what it is that I want so that I can get the end result that I want? And also, how can I take what is given and mold it into the right thing? If it's not exactly as I'm imagining it, then how do I take that and make that be what it will be and feel really great about it?
There's that transition. I want to just call attention to this because it's something that happens to a lot of young people, and you either get it or you miss it, and it can kind of spiral, which is there's always a point where you're doing all of it, right? So there's like a point where like you don't have a lot of money, you're passionate about it. So like if you're a costume designer, you're making everything, you're doing the whole thing. For me, it was production design. So it's like I'm doing the whole thing. I'm building, I'm painting and doing the thing. And then at a certain point, as the jobs increased, I got a little bit more help. So I'm like doing other jobs. So it's like I'm driving the truck and I'm going and picking up set deck and all that stuff. So costume, same thing. And then at one point, I specifically remember a job. I was on a music video and it was the first time that I had like help. Like I had a set decorator and a prop master, like all these things. And I remember panicking because I'm so used to controlling those things myself. And it's a moment of realization that you have where you realize you can't do all of it. And then you trust the crew to like fill it in. Right. So like my thought process is like, if this is about 70% or above of what I would have kind of done or my general direction, I'm in a good place. And then I learned to pull back and start to trust everyone. But some people don't make that transition. They still think that they have to do it all. And I think that that's a really good point to bring up, which is like at a certain point, you realize that you're trusting your crew, you're trusting people, and then you seek that out. You seek out the people with like the best ideas and the people that are going to bring their game to it and bring ideas that you would never have. Right. Absolutely. Is that something that you kind of like started to kind of figure out and kind of like learn?
Absolutely. And as you said earlier, that's when everyone is doing their best job. Because, and really because all of these, all of these artisans are creative beings. They're creative people. They want to they want to be creating.
Yeah.
And, if you're a designer that will only have it a certain way and it's stifling, that it doesn't actually allow them to expand in the way that they might want to expand and would be beneficial for the design. So I'm a bit back and forth. I have a clear idea of what it might be, but then if there's another good idea that's coming into the same direction and it works, then I'll kind of veil that into or fold that into how I see it, and that has become what I am as because it's less in the world of theater, because when I was in theater, and still do, my theater work was I was sitting down at the drawing table and drawing all the costumes, and I was painting all the costumes, so I was very connected to what the design was. So it didn't move very far away from what had come out of my head. I wasn't necessarily taking other people's ideas.
Correct.
Maybe an assistant would make a suggestion, but overall, it was what was coming out of my head.
Right.
Anymore, there's no time for me to literally sit down and do all of that drawing. Like I don't, I don't take the time in the same way. I don't use my time in the same way. So to approach a film like Wicked, it was imperative to have a team of concept artists that could take direction, and then I could get an image that I could respond to. So I didn't have to take the time to draw all of it out. Excuse me, just one second. So, I think that it's still, it took me a while to realize and accept that this is still design. It didn't necessarily come out of my hand, but it's still a design that I can own.
Correct.
And that is in keeping with the overall idea of what this film is. And I apply that then to, after doing that with the film, which is when, that was the first time that I was using a concept artist, I think. And then I have now applied that to my work on Broadway, and operate in a similar fashion. Still with Broadway, I mean, it's kind of back and forth, like with stuffs that I, just did, months ago. I drew all of it, and I was drawing it and painting it and making, fabric choices about it because I had the time to do that. But, like with Death Becomes Her, I needed to pull somebody else in because I was already on to the next project,
Correct.
And so it was, actually Death Becomes Her, I'm trying to think I was still filming. I think that I was still filming when I was doing that.
Oh, wow. So you were doing both at the same time.
Yeah. So it's just, it just became necessary, because, you only have a certain number of hours in your day.
I'm going to speak to this really quickly, just because we're in it, which is the conceptual process with concept art. So for our viewers, my company 9B Collective, that I co-founded with Mike Awandi and Aldous Hodge, we were able to do, privileged enough to be able to work with Paul in the initial stages of just trying to kind of get the ideas out of your head, right? That conceptual process is it's a joy, but it's also like the first kind of stab at like what things are. And I appreciate the way you speak about it because it's kind of like this like back and forth overall, your overall direction, but it does shift and change depending on kind of like what's brought to it. And I want to talk about that because one of the things that people need to understand is it's all coming out of your head, but it's shifting and moving. And it's like little lanes and pathways, right? That you're kind of doing. And then ultimately the thing that you have to do is it's visual communication. So you're kind of visualizing what's coming out of your head, doing quick sketches, pulling references and things, and it's all kind of going in a general direction. Can you just talk about that process for our viewers so that they kind of understand what that's like? Because you were kind of getting into it, but just kind of talk about like what that entails for you.
Sure. I mean, for I think about my process on Wicked,
yes,
I started with I started with abstract images or like photographs of qualities of things, whether it was something that was in nature, organic, or like an Escher print or a kaleidoscope, or and all of those spoke to me for different elements within the design. And so, once I do that process, which is pretty, it's a deep dive into that kind of imagery, then I start to look at shape, and I'm looking at, I'm thinking about period, and more specifically, the clothing that will represent character, that will somehow inform character and who they are as characters, So I go through a process of, even now, drawing it out to get my brain to understand what it is that I'm thinking about. And that's always been a part of my process. What I have, what I've had to let go because of time is doing a beautifully rendered drawing. And carrying it through with character and a pose and because I don't have the time to create a sketch that's going to sell the
Correct.
idea. And that's really what it, it is representative of the costume, but really you're trying to give as close an idea of what that costume is going to look like once it's on screen to the director and to the producer. And so my part of that is sketching out character. I still have all of these rough sketches that were of Elphaba. I still do a pose that feels like Elphaba. I draw a face that feels like Elphaba. She's not going to be somebody who's like giddy and laughing. It's pretty severe. But I need to see it in motion in two-dimensionally as a drawing, because that's how my brain understands what it could potentially be.
Yeah.
And that time that I'm taking to draw it, I'm also thinking about qualities of fabric, color, texture, techniques. It slows my brain down to a place where I'm just focusing on this character and all the elements that are going to create the costume.
Yes.
And then I'm now able to hand it over to your team, and I can talk about it in a way that is informed. And it's not just, I just need something black. I need her to be in a black dress and, that's not, it doesn't cut it for me, because I don't know what that is as a story.
Right.
Or it's a, it's a one level story. And I wanted for it to resonate in a much deeper way. So, I go through that process, or collectively, if I'm doing like I worked with an amazing conceptual artist for this ballet of Sleeping Beauty, and it working with, because the task is, or was, we haven't opened yet, but it is to tell the story of Sleeping Beauty with elements of design from the Pacific Northwest, the native sensibility of the Pacific Northwest. So there's, and exploring that, and the high contrast of color and black, and the quality of line that is created in some of those totems, and so it was communicating that along with qualities of shape to the Shane Ballard, who's the conceptual artist for that. I needed to be clear about how I was imagining it, and then when I get that image back from him or from your team, then I can see what it is, and then start, because I'll do an overdraw, and it might be, this pose just doesn't work for me, or this does, it doesn't. I'm still thinking about, this body needs to represent who this character is going to be, and the scale of all of the elements needs to work together. So I'm looking at it, pretty collectively to perfect what I have in my head, and then we take it to the next step. And then it expands into the overall arc of the character and what that character is going to wear throughout the film.
And then I want to talk about too, because you were lucky enough to have, you had a huge crew on this, and you also had, I'd be remiss if I didn't call out Mr. Darryl Warner and the illustrators that you had working in-house there in London. So can you talk about that process? Because then even more so, you guys were like this tight unit where you had people drawing and you had people making. So just talk about that really quickly for the audience.
Well, what was necessary for this film, I had about 8 months of pre-production design time. We wouldn't call it pre-production, but 8 months of design time, while I was also designing MJ and Mr. Saturday Night. So that and part of that was because of COVID,
right?
And we had to stop in production. Like, I was hired, I was designing, and I was given a certain number of weeks to design to get the design going, and then they officially stopped because they decided that they weren't going to film in Atlanta. They were going to go to London. So then we were waiting, to find out when we would start the actual production. But in that time, I was still, creatively, I knew that the film was going to happen, and I knew that, my brain was not going to stop. So I think that, at that time we were working together, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we were, because I was giving notes to everyone
completely
when I was backstage.
No, I talked to you several times where you were backstage for MJ, yeah, which was kind of incredible.
But that gave the overall design time to cook.
Yeah.
And then there was the date where I was going to travel to London. They decided that they were going to use studios in London, which was a godsend, and we would have access to all those artisans, craftspeople. I hit the ground running. It was like there was no other way, because we had 2 films and really only enough time to create really one film. But it expanded. It was a tight. Meaning it was a very tight period of time.
Yes.
And there was a period of production, but then once we started doing our camera tests and going into filming, we were still making costumes. We were making costumes the whole way through, which meant that we were designing. I was designing along, and Daryl was, by my side, being the conceptual designer or artist. And then there were 3 others that were working with us, because we were dealing with buttons and all kinds of symbols for shiz, and on and on and on and on. And Daryl, what was so beautiful, and I'm so glad that you're shining a light on him, is that he is an amazing. All of your team are amazing artists. Daryl is an incredible artist, watercolor artist, and that's also that hits so close to home for me, because that is my medium of choice as well. Yes. So our process, is the same. And I wanted, I think that Dulcie made she clocked that in some way, that my supervisor clocked that in some way, because I hadn't worked with Daryl before Wicked. But there was that tactile quality of pencil work and adjusting the pencil work, which he was very open to sharing. And I could be a part of the conceptual artist process as I was looking at his pencil drawing and seeing what I liked and what I didn't like, making adjustments, doing, an overdraw or correction or, augmentation. And then he would carry it, through to finish. So that was, and he was on full time. He was completely there every day, as we were, establishing what all those, costumes might be, that needed to be created.
There's an incredible amount of specificity when you talk about this process too, that people need to kind of understand, which is the costume is constantly evolving. Even when in the sketch phase, you're changing things. And then also even in the cell, right? The one thing that people get stuck on is like the drawing or the sketch or even the concept or whatever it is, isn't the final product, right? It's just the cell. And there's all these things, even if you have a perfectly realized illustration or a concept, right? You still have to start breaking it down and figuring out what those things actually are. So it's like, you might infer that there's a gold button, but it's like, what's on that button? Is it embroidered? Does it have an engraving on it? Is there a symbol? And then that's graphic design. So it can get really specific. And I think one of the things that you do really well is there's this part of the creative process where you're trying to get things approved, but you try to do a lot of that up front so that you have more time to actually do the physical thing we're going to see, which is the actual costume, right? So it's like, because the costume design to a degree, and many costume designers have told me this, it's like ultimately the costume design actually happens on the form. Like when you're physically doing the costume, then you start really seeing the things in the drape, and then you make choices and changes and things. So I want to call that out just specifically because it can get a little inundating and overwhelming, because it's like you have this initial thing in your head, but you really then have to execute it, right? And that can be difficult.
Right. I was just, as you're talking about it, I was thinking about the bubble dress, let's say.
That's what I wanted to bring up. So please talk about
Glinda.
Yeah.
Because you did a version of it. There was a
Mm-hmm.
version that was done, I think. I think that you stepped in and you did another version of it, which was
Mm-hmm.
reflective of what all of the imagery that I had given, and then the overdraw. And then you created the first image of what Glinda would be.
Mm-hmm.
But then once I got to London and
Mm-hmm.
Daryl was on, because we were then all in the room together, meaning the
Uh-huh.
director and Nathan, the production designer, Alice, there was something that shifted in the shape for that dress. And I
Correct.
don't exactly remember what informed that.
It was the spiral.
It was the spot.
So
Yes.
the
Yeah.
spiral concept became more prevalent when you guys were all together with the production
Right.
designer and everything else. And so that first one that I did was a lot more symmetrical, but
Right.
that
Exactly.
spiral set it into this beautiful place where it took all of your references and all the petals and kind of the overlay and then
Right.
turned it into this thing where there was like a central point where it could spiral from. And that's what it,
Right.
it was
That's
super
That's
cool.
That's
Yeah.
That's it. So, like you said, I mean, it becomes very organic, and
Mhm.
then even to look at Daryl's drawing versus what that dress actually was, because
Mhm.
Daryl is a concept art. He's not a costume maker. He's an artist,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
the tailor had to take that image and then make sense of what those shapes were going to be. I mean, and I was by both of their side, but it then shifted as well because we were going after a certain silhouette, but fabric and the kinds of fabric and boning and crinoline, all of those elements will only work in certain ways. And, so you have to allow that to happen, so that is then again going to shift what the dress ends up becoming, or what the costume ends up becoming.
Quick stats for the bubble dress, because we want to talk about the overwhelming amount of detail that this was. Was the bubble dress one of the hardest or the hardest thing to make?
It's probably the hardest, engineering wise. It was the hardest thing to make. Yeah.
Pink Bubble Dress had 137 pattern pieces, and it took 225 hours to hand bead the pink bodice, right? So at a certain point, was there a point where in this, because I always laugh about this too, it's like even like a drawing, there's a point where you get into your drawing and you're like, this is the ugliest thing. And then and then there's a point where you're like frustrated, and then you're like, oh, this could be kind of cool. And then you're like, this is awesome. Did you kind of go through that process where you weren't quite sure how it was going to turn out? And then like, did you have struggles with it, or did you just, you know what I mean? Yeah.
For every costume, really. I mean, you're kind of like, is this right? Is this going to work? And then you say, no, this is really great. I mean, this could be really wonderful. And I was always, I think that it's important for me to be questioning from, like seeing the different facets of what the design is and questioning it, so that I'm double and triple checking what my decision is. Because once I'm, and this is the challenge of film. Once you make that decision, it's like it is printed and done. Once it's on film, there's no going back.
That's it.
And most definitely with these two films, where you're setting up some looks in the first film that will then appear in the second film, or the decisions that you make about, because for me, I always want to show some kind of emotional arc. So if I start qualities of a design, I want for it to reveal itself in the way that I'm orchestrating it. But I better love what that start point is, and then make sure that gets filmed in the way that I want for it to be filmed. There's a setup with, and this, it's kind of this insight thing. For me, it's an insight thing because I've never talked about it. There's a raincoat that Elphaba wears into the forest when she's taking the lion cub into the forest, and with Fierro. And I was, it was like, I kept saying, I need for this coat to be seen. I need for her to wear it at some point, because it's going to set up where we go for the second film. And I was never quite sure where we were going to get that to happen, because all of the design elements that I have for this, her evolution, it's based in, largely based in the quality of what is in that coat. Well, then to see that it did make it, it made it in, she's on the bike, the coat is flapping behind her, it's like, yes, those, so those are decisions that you just have to make sure that it's carrying through. And when you're working on two films at the same time, you're never quite sure that you're going to be on set at the right time to make sure that it happens.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a process where you're kind of like, you're thinking about it. I think you just spoke to the beauty of storytelling of costume design, because that's what it really is. It's like character design and storytelling, right? Yeah. And kind of thinking about, while you're kind of in the weeds, it's like macro, micro. So micro is like you're in it and you're looking at this one costume, and then macro is like you consider how this costume changes the character throughout the whole story and how it relates to all the other costumes you've designed, right? Yeah. Work ethic wise, because you have a really strong work ethic, when you're there and you're in the weeds of it, because you're coming in like first to leave, first to be there, last to leave, all of those things. Are there ever moments where you find, I guess, levity in it? Or like, are there moments where you're completely present, specifically on this film, on Wicked? Were there moments where you were present, where you just couldn't believe still that you were designing this? Like, were you actually like focused in on like being in the present moment? Or do you kind of zone and kind of just get into this thing where you're just producing, and then does that happen for you after? Like, are there moments where you feel completely present, or like, you know what I mean? Present in the sense of like, what am I doing? Or do you just kind of, how do you, what's your thought process on that?
As I remember that experience, I felt like there was no other way but to keep pushing forward.
Yeah.
But it was also my joyful spot. I mean, it was also, it was hard. It was exhausting, but every day I got to go in and work with amazing creative people, and there were challenges along the way and asks along the way that you never knew that you were going to be able to make. So that was scary and very challenging, but it was all within the bubble, if you will, of exciting creativity. And we had a team of makers and also a creative directorial team and producing team, like that everybody felt like their intention was all moving in the same direction. And we just hope that the money from Universal would hold out.
Did you have? Oh, go ahead. No, please go.
No, it's I think that I don't know where I was going with it, but I think that I don't know. I think that it wasn't until I saw the film, which I didn't see it until maybe a month before it was released. And, it was really emotional for me to see what we had done.
Yes.
To see the evidence of what we had done, what we had spent our 2 years doing.
You got so much on screen.
Yeah. And again, another bouquet to John, that he wanted to capture all of that he valued what the costumes brought to the storytelling of the film, that he actually embraced that and got it on film. And that, hands down is the biggest gift.
I love that, because there's the point where you can kind of pull back and look at everything. And then I think there's also I think that's hard to explain to people when you work on these things too, is that the general audience sees these things after they're done and they've got score and music and all this. They're not necessarily living with it every day. So they just experience the final product, right? And I think that to a degree, it's hard to explain that when we're working on things, we're kind of in it, and then we kind of experience it in a similar way, but it's kind of like the closing, it's like a new beginning, but it's also the closing of this project where you get to actually be emotional and experience it and see the work. And one of the things that I will say for the costume department in general with you and everyone on this film is it really did show up in the final product. And it did show up. Like I was just surprised by the sheer amount of detail that some of even the background extras or like people that didn't have speaking roles. Cause there's like 76 speaking roles in this one, which you had featured people, which is a lot. Cause then like, it's like, okay, how do you go from like, if you have like featured munchkins, it's like, do their costumes get a little extra zhuzh as opposed to the ones that are just kind of moving around? But it's like, there was so much in there. And I started to notice the spiral detail, even when I was watching it in person. Like the Emerald City beauticians or the ones with the like there's so many cool things in there and I was like, wait, what was that? And then it was gone and I'm like, wait, like it was there. Right. It was there and I just was like, I think it's a sheer testament to how hard you guys worked because this is a full storytelling world building exercise. So it's not like you can go and just buy any of these things.
Right.
And it's all there on screen and so many details that you kind of go by, but it's immersing you in the world. So like when you're thinking about that, like as you're able to pull back and you finally got a chance to watch it, is that kind of what you were responding to, was being able to see?
Absolutely. I mean, it was, and the fact that it actually works, that it actually holds together because you go into a process of, and because we were filming both films at the same time.
Yes.
We were doing scenes from the first film and then, and then the next day we would be in the second film. And that we were the first film, so, it was disjointed how we were filming. So you couldn't really see how it was all going to lay itself. I mean, you could imagine it, but you couldn't literally see how it was all going to lay itself out. So seeing the screening, it laid itself out. It holds together. It makes sense visually, and it's also pretty spectacular to immerse yourself in it. There's also, I just wanted to say, that having everything, having it always be present was part of creating a world for both myself and for Nathan that the audience could actually believe existed.
Yes.
Which was actually drawing people into the experience. It made you, where you wanted to wear the clothes, where you wanted to be in Emerald City walking around, or you wanted to be at Shiz and wearing those uniforms. You're always, I was always aware of pulling the audience in, which is the feeling that I was getting from the fan base of the musical, of the Broadway musical, is like wanting to be a part of it. And I think that, you just do. I mean, I remember, I wanted to be a part of Fame. I wanted to go to that same school. I wanted to, it's like, so that, wanting to churn up those emotional responses is what's, so wonderful.
So basically with this creative process and kind of the overall like world building, it was a really good experience for you. And I want to just ask another kind of quick question, which is like in kind of the overall experience for you, like when you wrap out and you think about it and thinking about these two films, how did it make you feel to be kind of like, did you feel creatively fulfilled? Like in kind of the like at the end of it, did you feel like you had kind of expressed what you needed to express, got out what you needed to say? How was that feeling for you at the end of the process?
Absolutely. It was, it was complete. I think that, it was what I was saying, it was really hard to pull away from it. And, I tend to go a little blue. Like, I grieve endings in processes, when, because the creative focus, can be, intense. And with this doubly so. So it took me a while. I actually went on a trip so that, so I didn't pack everything up and just go home. I needed a period of being in a neutral space or being in a neutral environment that was also, it was making my brain work. It was creative thinking, so that I didn't just crash into, just feeling badly that was done. That period was done. But I was well aware that we were finished. We had shot all of our scenes, And we did a great job doing it. And we had a photo shoot at the very end with Sophie Holland, and it was amazing to see what we had done again. Like what we, so some of the costumes that we hadn't seen in a while, to see them on our performers and see them recreated in their roles was really beautiful, to revisit that.
Well, I want to thank you, Paul. We're out of time for now, but I want to say thank you for coming onto the show. And I also want to thank you for just the sheer amount of creativity you've put out and the kindness and the joy. So thank you so much for that. And also looking forward to the second part of this movie, the second part of Wicked, to see what you did there. I want to say, we are in closing. I want to just encourage everyone to really go out and kind of see this film from different eyeset too, and think about all of the work that Paul is talking about and the creative processes that go into it, and think about all the creatives that are behind these things, and think about how to kind of like invest yourself in supporting the arts, because I do think they're important, especially during the times that we're in right now. And I want to thank you, Paul, for championing that. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely, Phil. This was a wonderful conversation. Let me just add that if anyone wants to go to my Instagram page to see, I've been trying to shine a light on the makers that were involved with making the costumes for Wicked, so you can get a little glimpse in what their process.
Paul, what's your handle on Instagram?
It is Paul Tazewell.
Is it at Paul Tazewell? You'll be able to find it easily, but yes. Once again, thank you to our sponsor, Universal Costume Department. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Thank you to our guest, costume designer Paul Tazewell. We appreciated having you here, and such a lovely talk as always. Founder and executive producer Martika Ibarra, and co-founder costume designer Marilyn Vance. And thank you to all our viewers for tuning in. And make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and wherever you tune in and listen to your podcast. Follow me on Instagram, your host, Phillip Boutté. I am at Phil_Boutté, and I will see you again. Thank you so much. Goodbye, everybody.